You ever take a job just because it seemed easy on paper? Yeah, that's how this all started for me. I mean, who wouldn't want to get paid for walking around at night, watching over a carnival that's closed? Seemed like a no-brainer. Simple, quiet, perfect. I've always been a night owl. Staying up late, binge-watching stuff, scrolling my phone when I should have been sleeping. So, when I saw the job listing for a night shift security guard at a local carnival, I thought, why not? I'm up all night anyway. Plus, the pay wasn't bad. It wasn't some fancy theme park or anything. Just your run-of-the-mill carnival. The kind with rusty rides, weird music playing through old speakers, and those food stalls that still smell like cotton candy and popcorn even when they're closed. I didn't care. I needed the money, and I figured this would be easy work. After all, who even comes to a carnival at night? The first night on the job was exactly what I expected, boring. I showed up at around 11 p.m. The carnival was already shut down for the day. No crowds, no lights, just rows of rides standing still and silent. There were those old clown statues, though. You know the ones. Big, bright painted smiles. Frozen wide eyes that always seem to follow you when you're not looking directly at them. Creepy? Yeah. But at first, I didn't pay much attention to them. They were just props. Decorations meant to entertain kids during the day. The guy training me handed me a flashlight and keys. He didn't stick around for long. Just showed me where the staff room was, how to lock up the main gate, and where the cameras were. Easy enough. I remember him giving me this weird look before he left. Though, he paused at the gate and muttered something like, "It's always quiet at night. Just don't wander too far." I laughed it off. Probably just some leftover spook story to mess with the new guy. People like to do that, don't they? Especially in places like this where the atmosphere already feels weird. I mean, it's a carnival. They're supposed to feel creepy when they're empty, right? For the first few hours, I did what anyone would do on an empty shift. I killed time, checked my phone, played a game or two, walked around the park with my flashlight, feeling like I was in some low-budget horror movie. And honestly, I felt pretty good about it. I was alone but not lonely. It was peaceful in a way, quiet except for the occasional creak of the Ferris wheel in the breeze or the distant sound of cars on the highway. For a night owl like me, this was perfect. I even started to joke around with myself. I passed one of those clown statues near the funhouse and said out loud, "Good evening, Mr. Clown. Don't work too hard, all right?" Yeah, I was talking to clowns. That's how dull it was. But I wasn't scared. Not yet. And let's be honest, clowns are creepy. But they're not alive. Or so I thought. But as I kept walking my rounds, something started to feel off. It's hard to explain. You know that feeling you get when someone's watching you? Like there's something just out of sight, just over your shoulder? I shrugged it off. Told myself I was just overthinking things. It was probably the silence messing with my head. Still, I couldn't shake the weird vibe that came from those clowns. I swear, every time I walked past them, I felt like their heads had turned just a little, like their painted smiles had gotten just a bit wider. But nah, I told myself I was imagining it. That's what we do, right? We convince ourselves nothing's wrong, even when our gut says otherwise. So there I was, flashlight in hand, walking past silent rides and empty stalls, telling myself this job was still as easy as I thought it'd be. But I'll admit, those clowns, they were starting to get under my skin. I had no idea what was waiting for me that night. If I'd known, I probably never would have taken the job. I swear I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. I'd walked past those creepy clowns every night without a second thought. But then, things started to get weird. Started on my third night. Everything was normal at first. Same empty carnival. Same quiet air. The occasional creak from a ride swaying in the wind. I walked my rounds, feeling a little more confident than the first night, even joking around with myself like I always did. But then I noticed something strange. One of the workers, Greg, he was the guy who trained me, started acting off. I didn't think much of it at first, maybe it was just his vibe. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I passed him by one of the concession stands where he was supposed to be checking the equipment. He didn't even look at me, just stood there, staring blankly at the machines. And when I said, "Hey Greg, everything all right?" he barely responded. Just muttered, "Yeah, just checking." Weird. He didn't seem like the type to get distracted. But that wasn't the oddest part. The odd part was how he was muttering. It wasn't a normal conversation. More like he was talking to someone or something that wasn't there. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt like he was warning someone or something. I figured it was just a bad mood, or maybe he was tired from working too many nights in a row. But as I walked away, I saw him glance over his shoulder at me, and for a second I could have sworn he looked nervous. I mean, it wasn't just like he'd seen me. It was like he was worried I'd see something. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. People act weird sometimes, especially when they're working late hours. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that night, I went to check the lights in the back lot, where the Ferris wheel was. The Carnival's main gate was locked, but there was another exit that led to the staff parking lot. As I walked past one of the storage sheds, I noticed something I couldn't explain. The toolbox on the floor, which had been perfectly still when I walked by earlier, was now open. The tools were scattered all over the ground. I knew I hadn't left them like that. I paused, trying to figure out if someone had been there. Maybe Greg, maybe someone else. But everything else in the shed looked undisturbed. I bent down to pick up the tools, telling myself it was just a mistake. But then the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there. No one. I didn't know what to think. Was I just imagining things? I told myself it's the night air. The wind is probably moving things around. But the air didn't feel right. Felt too still, too quiet. I decided to finish my shift, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept walking around the park, checking the rides, making sure everything was locked. But the sense that something wasn't right kept growing. Every time I passed the funhouse, I could feel my heart race, like someone was standing just behind me, waiting to grab my shoulder. But when I turned around, nothing was there. The noises, too. At first, I thought they were just the usual creaks and groans of old rides settling in the night. But then there were other sounds, more subtle, like whispers. I was sure I heard whispers coming from the funhouse at one point. I froze, straining my ears to listen. Nothing, just the normal sounds of wind and the occasional clang from the Ferris wheel. But when I walked closer, I could swear I heard it again, like low murmurs, voices barely audible. I told myself it was probably just the wind or the sounds echoing from somewhere else. It wasn't anything to worry about, right? It wasn't like I was in a horror movie. But the whispers didn't stop. They came and went, always when I was alone, always when the night was the quietest. And every time, I felt that knot in my stomach tighten. I tried to ignore it. I really did. I focused on doing my job, walking around, checking the cameras, but the weirdness kept growing. One night, I noticed something even stranger. The light in the staff room had flickered, just for a moment, like a brief, sharp blink. But I was sure I'd turned it off before I went out on my rounds. At first, I thought I was just tired, maybe imagining things. But then the lights flickered again, this time in the hall where the storage lockers were kept. And the more I tried to shake it off, the more it felt like something was playing with me. I told myself it's probably just the old wiring. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I became. There was no explanation, no reason, but it felt like there was a presence there. something I couldn't quite see, but that was definitely there, watching me. And then, late one night, I saw Greg again. He was walking toward the gates, muttering under his breath. He stopped, looked directly at me, and then his face went pale. He turned quickly, like he had to get away from something, but there was nothing behind him, just the empty carnival. It hit me then, this wasn't just random weirdness. Something was off about this place, and it was starting to feel dangerous. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just the weird late hours, the isolation, but something told me this wasn't just my imagination anymore. I was in over my head, and I had no idea what was really going on here. You know when something's wrong, even if you can't explain it? It's that gut feeling, that heavy knot in your stomach, that tells you to leave. That's how I felt every time I walked into the carnival now. After that night with Greg, I tried to keep my head down, do my job, and not overthink things. I figured maybe the whispers and flickering lights were in my head. Sleep deprivation, too much caffeine. But every night since, the strange stuff got worse. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. I started seeing things. The first time, I thought it was my imagination. I was walking by the Ferris wheel again. My flashlight cut through the darkness, just enough to see the cars hanging still in the air. I was halfway past it when something caught my eye. Movement. I stopped. Slowly, I turned the beam of the flashlight back. For a second, I didn't see anything. Just the same old rusty ride. But then, on one of the cars, I saw it. Something was there. A shadow. A figure. Sitting perfectly still. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. But I swear to you it was there. I blinked hard, shook my head, and when I looked back, it was gone. The car was empty. My brain went into overdrive trying to explain it. A trick of the light. Maybe I didn't see it at all. I moved on quickly, my heart racing, telling myself I was fine. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. That wasn't the end of it. Every shift, the weirdness got worse, like the place itself was alive and angry. One night, as I was walking through the funhouse, because apparently it's my job to patrol the creepiest part of the carnival, I felt it again. That feeling of being watched. You know when the air feels heavy, like something's pressing on your chest? That's how it felt. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was overthinking things. But then I noticed something. One of the mirrors, those warped funhouse mirrors that make you look twice as tall or twice as wide, didn't reflect me properly. In the mirror, I wasn't alone. I froze. There was a shape, small, hunched, like someone crouching right behind me. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't move. I turned around quickly, shining my flashlight into the darkness behind me. Nothing. The room was empty, but when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was still there. I didn't stick around to figure it out. I backed out of the funhouse so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. By now, I wasn't the only one noticing things. One of the janitors, Joe, had always been quiet, but lately he'd been avoiding eye contact with me completely. He'd mumble something whenever we crossed paths, and once, I caught him staring at the clown statues near the ticket booth. He looked scared. I approached him that night because I had to know. Joe, man, what's going on here? Why does it feel like... I paused, trying to pick the right words. Like this place isn't right? Joe didn't answer at first. He just shook his head and muttered, "They don't like being seen." "What are you talking about?" I asked, but he didn't say another word. He just walked off, leaving me standing there, confused and more unsettled than before. Things escalated further the following night. I was in the staff room taking a break. I'd left my flashlight on the table, and when I turned back to grab it, it was gone. Just gone. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. Maybe I'd left it in the hallway or by the Ferris wheel. I started retracing my steps, searching every corner of the place. But halfway through my search, I found it, right back on the table where I'd left it. I know what you're thinking. I forgot, right? Maybe I didn't look properly. But no, I checked that table 3 times, and the flashlight wasn't there. My hands were shaking when I picked it up. I felt like a puppet, like something was playing games with me, just to see how long it would take me to crack. The worst moment came later that night. I was walking past the clown statues again, doing my rounds. By now, I'd gotten used to avoiding eye contact with them. But as I passed, I swear I heard something soft, quiet, like the sound of fabric shifting. I stopped dead. My flashlight beam hovered on one of the clowns. It was smiling, painted, frozen, but something was off. The hand. Its hand was resting on its knee before. I was sure of it. But now it was hanging by its side. I swallowed hard and stepped back, the light shaking in my hand. I told myself I'd imagined it. I didn't hear fabric. I didn't see the hand move. But as I turned to walk away, I swear I heard it. A giggle, quiet, childlike, and then a faint thud, like a footstep behind me. I didn't look back. I ran. I didn't stop until I was out of the gate, standing in the cold night air, panting like I just sprinted a marathon. By now, I knew there was no explaining this away. This place, this carnival, wasn't just creepy. It was wrong. And whatever was happening, it was getting worse. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't tired. Something was here. Something that didn't want me there. And I was starting to wonder if I'd make it out. It all came crashing down that night. Everything I'd been avoiding, everything I'd tried to push to the back of my mind, finally came to a head. And let me tell you, it was worse than I ever imagined. I had already decided that something wasn't right. The carnival wasn't just a creepy place. It was alive with something dark, something that didn't belong. But up until now, I'd always been able to talk myself out of it. Always managed to convince myself that there was some logical explanation for the shadows, the strange behavior, and the odd sounds. But tonight, there was no more pretending. I was doing my usual rounds. The Ferris wheel still looked as eerie as ever. The old carnival music playing in the background, distorted by the wind. But tonight, it was quieter than usual. Too quiet. I hadn't heard a single soul for the past hour. Not even the sounds of the ticket taker chatting with the guests. Felt like the place was holding its breath. And that's when it hit me. The whole carnival was empty. I mean, completely empty. No kids running around. No parents taking photos. No late-night wanderers like me. Just silence. Felt wrong. Felt like the whole world had shut off, and I was the last one left. I told myself it was just the night shift, and maybe everyone had gone home. But deep down, something told me I wasn't alone. That's when I saw her. She was standing by the old carousel, her back to me. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was another worker who was too busy to notice me. But when I called out to her, there was no response. "Hey, you all right?" I asked, walking closer. Still nothing. No movement, no acknowledgement. I was only a few feet away now, and that's when I saw it, her hands. They were wrong, bent at odd angles like she wasn't even human. The skin on her arms was stretched too tight, and her fingers looked too long, like they didn't belong. I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just some tired worker. It was something else. "Hello!" I called out again, my voice trembling slightly, but she didn't turn around. I took a slow step back, my eyes never leaving her. Then I heard it, a low guttural noise. It started out as a soft hum, but it quickly grew louder, almost like a growl and then a whisper. Not in the air, no, it was coming from behind me. I spun around, flashlight in hand, scanning the dark. Nothing, just shadows. But then, I heard it again, a shuffling, like something dragging across the ground. It was close. Too close. I was starting to panic now. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the cold sweat sticking to my shirt. That's when I realized something was behind me. The growling intensified, and that's when I saw it. A figure. Tall. Gaunt. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. Black, hollow, and endless. I could feel them burning through me, like they were sucking the very life out of me. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare. The figure didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring right at me, its eyes locked onto mine like it was waiting for something, waiting for me to move. And that's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, fast and heavy, coming from behind me. They were getting closer, too close. Thud, thud, thud. I whirled around, flashlight trembling in my hand. Nothing, but the footsteps kept getting louder. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. The worker I had seen by the carousel was right there, standing in front of me, but something was different. Her head was turned at a twisted angle, like she was staring at me from the corner of her eye. Her mouth was open, and the whispering, that same low, guttural noise, was coming from her. But this time it wasn't just a whisper. It was a scream, a horrible, screeching sound that made my ears ring. I stumbled back, heart pounding, but I couldn't escape. The path was blocked. I was trapped. This was it. This was the moment I feared. I tried to call out for help, but my voice was weak, barely a whisper. No one was here. No one was coming. Felt like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I turned to run. My legs felt like jelly, like I was moving through thick mud, but I couldn't outrun it. Whatever it was, the creature, the thing behind me, the lights flickered above, casting shadows that seemed to come alive. I heard them, more footsteps, dozens of them. I looked up just in time to see figures emerging from the shadows, all of them staring at me with those same black, hollow eyes. They were coming closer, moving in on me like a pack of wolves. Thud, thud, thud. Each step they took was louder than the last. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized that there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. The air was thick with dread, and I could taste it, metallic like fear itself. One of the figures lunged at me, grabbing my arm. Its grip was ice cold, and its fingers dug into my skin like claws. I gasped, trying to pull away, but it only tightened. Then another one stepped forward, its mouth open wide, revealing sharp teeth that gleamed in the dim light. I could feel its breath on my face, hot and rancid. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't meant to survive this. The carnival wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it had been waiting for someone like me to come along. Someone who would stumble into its web and become a part of it. I didn't know if I could escape. I didn't know if anyone could. And as the creatures closed in, their eyes burning into mine, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I had already been trapped the moment I first stepped foot into this cursed place. I don't know how I managed to escape. It all happened so fast. A blur of panic, adrenaline, and pure survival instinct. 1 minute I was surrounded, trapped in that hellish carnival, and the next I was running. Just running, not even looking back. The figures, those things, were closing in on me. Their eyes locked on mine, their twisted faces grinning in the dim light. The one who had grabbed my arm let go for a moment, as if distracted, and that's when I bolted. My legs felt like they were on fire, every step harder than the last, but I didn't stop. Couldn't. I remember the sound of my footsteps pounding against the gravel path, mingling with the sound of theirs. But there was something different now, something off. The air had thickened, like a weight pressing down on me. I felt it pushing me down, as if the ground itself was trying to pull me back into the carnival. I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. The gates, the exit were so close. My heart was beating so fast, I thought it might explode. The Ferris wheel loomed ahead, spinning slowly, almost like it was mocking me. But I didn't stop. I ran past it, ignoring the way the shadows seemed to twist and stretch unnaturally around it. I had one goal now: escape. The gates were finally in front of me, but they were locked. My mind raced. I had no key, no way out. Panic set in. But then, out of nowhere, the gates creaked open, as if someone or something had unlocked them. I didn't wait to question it. I ran through, stumbling slightly as I crossed the threshold. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, heart still pounding in my chest, breath shallow. I drove for miles, not looking back, not even thinking about what I just left behind. It felt like I was leaving a dream, or maybe a nightmare, behind me. The carnival was gone in my rearview mirror, fading into the distance. I was free, but I didn't feel free. Weeks have passed since that night. I've tried to push it all out of my mind. I went back to my regular life, picked up my usual routines. I even managed to go out and have some fun. But the shadows still follow me. The memories cling to me like a second skin. Every time I walk down a street or into a building, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, just for a second, just to make sure. And the sound of footsteps, well, I hear them. Quiet, distant, but always there. Always right behind me. I went back to the carnival, a couple of days after I escaped. I had to see it with my own eyes. Maybe prove that I wasn't just going crazy. But when I got there, it was gone. The lot was empty, abandoned. Not a trace of the place remained. It was like it had never been there at all. The only thing left was the faint smell of rust and the eerie silence that hung in the air. Was it all in my head? Did I imagine the whole thing? But then, I swear I heard something. A whisper on the wind. A laugh. A voice calling my name. I shook it off, telling myself it was nothing. But deep down, I wonder, what was it? Was it something from my mind? Or was there something out there, still watching, waiting for me to return? I wish I could tell myself it was just a bad dream, that it was all in my head. But then I remember the way it felt. The cold hands, the dark eyes, the way the carnival seemed to breathe. I thought I'd forget it all once I left. I thought I'd never have to think about it again. But now, every shadow feels like it's watching me. Every flicker of light feels like a warning. Was I the only one who saw it? I'll never know. And that's what terrifies me. Subscribe for more horror stories every day.